Now let's consider a more modern day example, but still one I would argue is far from the challenges that we face today. The Wellcome Foundation was begun back in the late 1800s by two young men, actually Americans, Henry Wellcome and Silas Burroughs, who came over with the concept of making pills. They had a technology for compressing medicine into pill-shaped form, and that's the basis of their company. Now, sadly, Burroughs died shortly thereafter, leaving the entire company to Wellcome. But Wellcome persevered. He invested in innovation, came up with new medicines, and built a successful pharmaceutical company. In 1924, he put the company into a foundation, so making it responsible both for running the company and for investing the profits in things that benefited the world as a whole. The company continued to grow and thrive throughout the 1900s in response to world demand for new medicines and the kinds of technologies that made developing those new medicines possible. I'd like to take you, though, to 1980 and consider the challenges that the Wellcome Foundation members faced at that time. This is a time when manufacturing is essentially leaving London. There are very few manufacturers left. Wellcome is one of the few holdouts because it's becoming very expensive to manufacture here in the city. As a result, Wellcome Foundation faces some important challenges. Should they begin to split their operation? Should they move manufacturing into another location? They also were faced with questions around the cost of research and development. It was pretty expensive to develop a new drug, and the odds of getting a successful one were limited. And so the trend in the industry was toward increased consolidation. Companies were beginning to consolidate so that they'd essentially have more rolls of the dice. If the odds were low, they wanted to be big enough to be able to roll the dice many times in hopes of hitting that very successful new drug. And it was a time when technology was beginning to revolutionize the backroom. The 1980s was a time when computers were being used to change the way we did payroll, the way we kept accounts, all sorts of backroom functions, resulting in significant layoffs, even in the white-collar workforce. This is the time of Margaret Thatcher. And so politically, London is in a time when we're seeing a lot of deregulation, privatization of industries that previously had been nationalized, and extensive layoffs and unemployment as a result. It's a tough time. What would the foundation do? What's the jugular question that they needed to wrestle with in 1980 to make sure that Wellcome would continue to be a viable participant in the world going forward? In their case, they determined that this issue of rolling the dice, consolidation essentially to give them more leverage in research and development, was one of the important questions they had to tackle. And so by the mid-80s, the Wellcome Foundation actually merged with Glaxo to form what became Glaxo Wellcome. That organization subsequently went on to merge with SmithKline Beecham to become an even larger pharmaceutical entity. So they were swept up in that consolidation period. But some of the other practices that I think are important to consider is this is a time when people began to apply many of the techniques that came out of business to running research and development. So it was a time when we began to think about return on investment of R&D expenditures. And one of the downsides of that is that that actually forces you toward a more risk-intolerant portfolio, to safer investments. So it was a time when many of the breakthrough, significant ideas that Wellcome had been known for many decades began to diminish a bit, again fueling this need to consolidate and move into a larger organization. So they faced some difficult questions and they made some difficult decisions. What would you think is the appropriate strategy for a company that's facing an era of downsizing, re-engineering in the back room, and yet the continued need for investment in innovative processes? Wellcome, I think, is a good example to consider as we ponder that question for companies today.